Well, I want to welcome Professor Soli Ozel here in Zapion in the Economic Forum of Delphi.
Very happy
welcome,
to be
Professor.
here.
Well, I want to begin our discussion by asking you about the challenges for democracy in the 21st century, because what we're seeing now is a cultural resentment between the elites and the middle class, between the cities and the countryside, between the people that are, how can I describe it, that are nativists and the globalists. Right. And that is making, I think, the challenges for democracy more hurtful.
More?
Hurtful.
Yes.
I mean, it's hurting the democracy even more.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, yesterday in this forum, Timothy Garton-Ash, in his talk, said we need not just the redistribution of income, but we also need the redistribution of respect. And that, I think, is a very good formulation. I do agree with all the components that you've outlined, but I think there is also two other things that we should put on the table in order to discuss the future of authoritarianism versus democracy. I'll be brief. One, since 9/11, states have taken back from societies a lot of space, of freedom, and of rights. And we have voluntarily given it to them to be able to feel secure. The same thing happened last year because of COVID. And we have given up space of freedom and rights. That's one thing. And the states have also used this security freedom balance in their own favor. Just look at the United States. The Homeland Security Department is a kingdom on its own right, totally unaccountable, and can do by and large whatever it wants. Secondly, technology and technology companies are helping what an American academic, Shoshana Zuboff, calls surveillance capitalism. So companies on the one hand and their help to authoritarian states on the other control our lives, and we really cannot escape the gaze of powers that be, whether they be corporations or states. So the challenge is, how do we avoid this Orwellian and Huxleyan system?
And what is your opinion? How do we go about it?
Okay,
what can we do?
I think especially on the technology side, the technologies that are available to us, the way they are used to manipulate us, are taken from us a most important attribute of a democratic system. We are being pacified as citizens. Our citizenship reflexes are getting weaker. And unless those are resurrected, I really don't see how you can fight power. And that requires a different type of consciousness.
Yes, Professor, but with the social media and the power that we have through social media, don't we get to speak, to say, don't we have aren't we more powerful? Or not?
Unfortunately not, and for the following reason. Your suggestion is that we have a global village. That's what everybody expected in the 1990s. Instead, we have a proliferation of closed-in, no-exit little villages that have no communication, no roads, and no dialogue with one another. So we live in echo chambers, number one. Number two, a lot was made of the power of social media in getting people to gather to protest. Syntagma Square, Gezi Park in Turkey,
yes,
wherever.
And Arab Spring.
Arab Spring. But the thing is, they are just means, they're just media. They let you know that there will be a gathering. But organization is something else. A compatriot of mine, Zeynep Tüfekçi, who has analyzed trillions of Twitter and Facebook messages, wrote a book on this, Tweet and Tear Gas. And what she's saying is, what is important for political action is for you and I to know one another and to have been tested in difficult times so that we can trust one another. Whereas those social media-driven organizations or demonstrations, first of all, did lack that aspect, and second, they were anti-political. They refused to have a hierarchy. They refused to have leadership. And if you do not have a political project, a political goal, some sense of who speaks for you, then it dwindles, it fizzles out, unfortunately.
Well, what we see that also in Turkey, but we saw that also in the United States. We see what I asked you in my first question. We see that there is, people are one against the other. It's like it's us and them.
Them, yes.
Yes, and how do we fight that? We saw that also in the United States with Donald Trump. What happened in the Congress? What happened with the election of Joe Biden? So we don't see that only in the developing world. We see it everywhere now.
No, yeah, of course. Well, first of all, we had this populist wave, which has not yet abated. And in the United States, we're seeing it much more clearly, perhaps, than in any other developed country. And populism, although it's a democratic reaction in the sense that those who feel left out want to be heard and want to have their will translated or spoken for. But populism is also inherently authoritarian because populists believe they and only they represent the people. That others who don't think like them do not really count. They are very majoritarian, and in their understanding, minorities do not have rights. They've got to abide by what the majorities do. So it's inherently authoritarian. The right-wing populism is more so, I would think, than left-wing populism. Now, how do we overcome this? I think the Biden administration sees it that way, and it wishes to correct the first thing first. That is, by just unloading trillions of dollars on the population, and first of all, trying to make life economically, financially easier for the most downtrodden. They want to take the material base of complaints from them. But can this work to get rid of the culture of resentment that you mentioned at the beginning is the big question. We will get the answer to that in 2022 when they have the midterm elections.
And we see then what is going to happen because more than 70 million people voted for
74 million people voted for Trump.
Voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the resentment is there. Do these people here listen to Joe Biden, or are they, as you said, in their own closed room?
Again, we will have to wait for the full impact of the money that he's spending to be felt. Will this lower the tensions? Will this make people say, okay, we now have a leader who actually thinks of us, system is working, those of us who wanted to be inoculated can actually get our vaccines, the government is more responsive to our needs. Will they say that? But there's another, I mean, if we're going to talk about the United States, there is a far more fundamental problem in that America is a two-party system, and one of the parties is now openly on the path to becoming a fascistic party. The Republicans, apparently since the elections, in 33 states of the United States, 250 laws were presented to the Congresses of those states to change election laws, and all of them geared towards restricting access by those most disadvantaged into the voting process. So, and you've seen this already in Georgia, you've seen this in Florida, you're going to be seeing it in Texas. They will try to make sure that those segments of the population unlikely to vote for the Republicans will not be able to vote, or it will be very, very difficult for them to participate in the electoral process. That is really not the behavior of a normal democratically inclined or liberally inclined political party. So you do have that problem.
And in Turkey, what happened with Recep Tayyip Erdoğan? I remember when he was first elected, it was like a dream come true. It was democracy, with Islam together, like a liberal democracy, like it is in Europe, like it is in the United States. And then after some years, I think 5, 6, 7 years, things began to change.
Well, when Viktor Orban first made his appearance on the political scene in Hungary back in 1981, he was an icon of liberal democracy. We know what Viktor Orban today is like. Therefore, we have to see this in its own proper context. And in the Turkish case, yes, you're absolutely right that the AKP, the political party that President Erdoğan leads still today, came to power promising an enlargement of freedoms and rights with the pursuit of EU membership.
He did that, Professor.
Huh?
He did that.
He did that.
No, with the Kurds also.
Yeah. I think what happens is the old adage, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. As the circumstances change, the EU prospects have dwindled, and with the Arab Spring and the politics of the country moving in a certain direction, we have seen more and more centralization and monopolization of power. And with that came the shrinking of the space for freedoms and rights. And in our particular case, of course, the Gezi protests, and it was nothing like Syntagma Square where everything was burning, at least on television, that's what we saw. Gezi wasn't really nowhere near that, but Gezi protests have actually triggered a change in attitude. And of course, do not forget that the coup attempt in 2006 also gave the executive the legitimacy to actually restrict freedoms even further. And this is where we are right now.
And how do you predict, if you can make a prediction about the future in Turkey? Because sometimes we get a little bit confused with Turkey.
Of course. Look, the more democratic periods of Turkey were also the best periods that I remember in Turkish-Greek relations as well. So, well, the thing is, we have a damaged electoral system, but we still have an electoral system. And if we do go to the polls, and they're not due till 2023, but a lot of people do expect an early vote, all polls almost unanimously nowadays show that Mr. Erdoğan does not have as much of a grip on the electoral's favors as he did before. So for the Turkish public, we don't particularly care about the liberal aspects of democracy, but we care a lot about the voting box. And now you hear more and more people saying, bring the box. We'll give the lesson. And that, I think, is the most legitimate and the most normal way of changing the government that we have access to. And it's going to be a very important election for Turkey's future, in my view.
Well, what happened in Turkey, we see that in other countries. We saw that also in Brazil, in India. Do you think that that is something only for the...
underdeveloped countries? Yeah. But we've seen Trump. Look,
yes,
we cannot underestimate the fact that Donald Trump tried to stage a coup on the 6th of January by encouraging these people to go and attack and invade Congress. There were people there who, if they could have gotten their hands on Ocasio-Cortez, they could have killed her. Okay? So, no, this is a disease that is everywhere. Maybe it is more accentuated in certain underdeveloped countries, but the oldest democracy in the world is the United States, and we've seen what happened in the United States. A president refused to concede the election results, and in order to block the election results to be accepted by Congress, encouraged a raid to the Capitol building where Congress was actually convening in order to put the final stamp of approval to Joe Biden's election. No, this is a disease. And the thing is, democracies are very frail. And what I see, and that gives me hope, is for long we thought capitalism and democracy were natural partners. They are not natural partners. And this neoliberal market fundamentalist understanding of capitalism created incredible income divisions. Add to this educational differences, and we reach the point that you mentioned at the very beginning of culture of resentment and stuff. Now, when you look at Biden, even when you look at Boris Johnson, whether he can manage it or not, everybody is now far more interested in a more social democratic orientation with government taking certain responsibilities. COVID also made it very clear to everyone that unless you have effective government, you really cannot solve any problems. China is an authoritarian country. It managed, after it started the pandemic, it managed it well. Korea is a democratic country. It also managed it well. So did New Zealand. Iran is an authoritarian country. It couldn't. We're seeing every day what is happening in India and, of course, what is happening in Brazil. So governance, that is a government that functions and it functions and well and serves the interests of the people, that the importance of that is now better understood. And when you look at the philosophy of Joe Biden's economic policies, it's social democratic. The government re-intervenes. You put a leash on corporations and their greed. You start taxing them. The Americans are even talking about a worldwide tax so that they cannot evade taxes. Because, you know, no taxation, you cannot have democracy. So in that sense, the future challenges: can capital be controlled by the political process? And can governments be maybe streamlined but become more effective, and therefore lower the tensions that exist in society because of inequalities?
Yes, because the one thing is inequalities and many millions of people that feel that they are being left behind by globalization, by capitalism, by free markets, by what is happening. And the other one is that they have lost their trust. And I think that's important to the institutions.
You're absolutely right. And by the way, I mean, look, we all talk about globalism, we're all cosmopolitans and whatever. We have to do some autocorrection as well ourselves. That is, tone deaf to the concerns of ordinary people who just want to be left alone and who just want to be able to live their lives in their communities. And the thing is, this ultra or hyper globalization period has shaken and destroyed a lot of communities. And the destruction of communities then really makes people totally disoriented and much more prey to radical ideas and a sense of vengeance as well. So everybody will have to really rethink where they're standing and see whether or not we can reconcile the need for cooperation globally, certainly on the environment, we need to, and respecting communities and making sure that people can live decent lives. And whether the resources are there, I don't know, but at least philosophically, I think the shift has begun, or at least that's what I would like to see happening.
Thank you so much for this discussion, Professor Ozel.
Thank you very much.
And hope to see you next year again, but in Delphi.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.